Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the America House virtual floor. My name is Lucy Zoria, and I'm the program manager here at America House Kiev. Today in Kiev, it's very sunny, but also very stormy. The weather is heating up, and all of us are spending a lot more time outdoors. And we know that you, our audience, is so incredibly passionate about our environment. We hear it from you all of the time, and I want to share that all of us at America House do share your passion for everything green, everything alive, and we do also share your concerns. Today is our very first event, part of our Green Summer campaign here at America House. And today with us, we have an incredibly experienced and truly a great speaker who has over 25 years of experience in ecology and also educating people all about the environment. Shari Wilson is an American ecologist and educator and has been working to empower communities to learn not only more about their environment, but also to learn more about how they can actually help their environment. She is the president and founder of Project Central, which designs and implements environmental curriculum and projects in schools and communities. She has also been here to Ukraine and worked with Ukrainian teachers and Ukrainian students. So she is familiar with our situation. Today, she will be talking about environmental law and citizen action and how these two things help shape the environment in the US today. We will not also be learning about the steps that were done in the future and today, but also hopefully getting some inspiration about how all of us can be more active in preserving our natural resources and also sustainably managing them as we go forward. So throughout the event, feel free to send in all of your questions or comments. Towards the end of the session, Shari will be answering them and listening and responding to any concerns that you might have as well for your environment. So welcome, Shari. We're so happy to have you here tonight.
Thanks very much, Lucy, and Привет, друзі. It's nice to be here. I wish I was in Ukraine with you again, but hopefully someday we can make that happen when we're all traveling a little bit more. So today I wanted to talk with you about citizen action and how critical it is for making a change in our communities, and talk a little bit about how important it was in changing the way our environment in the United States was being managed. And I'm going to focus today on water, toxins, and forests. I am a teaching ecologist. I have a master's in ecology and work a lot with teachers and students. I'm also a doctoral student in educational sustainability at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. So for all of you students out there that might be tuning in, I'm right in there with you. It's always good to be lifelong learners. So as I mentioned, citizen action is responsible for all the improvements that we've had in the environment in the United States since really the 1950s. Today we're going to talk about protecting America's waters, the safety of chemicals, and especially preventing pollution, and sustainable management of forests. And I thought I would talk a little bit about community forestry because I think there's a lot of interest in that topic. So the main agency in our federal government in the United States that regulates and manages our environment is the Environmental Protection Agency. And so what is that? It's an agency that was founded in 1970, and it actually consolidated a lot of other smaller agencies into one. So a big reason why this happened is because of citizen action. 1970 was also the first day of Earth Day, when people in our country said, you know, we need to improve the environment. We have a lot of pollution in the air, in the water, on the land, and our government needs to be doing a better job. So the first Earth Day was very small, but it quickly grew into the global movement, really, that it is now. And for those of us who work in the environmental field, we say that Earth Day is every day, because we never stop trying to advocate for protecting and restoring our environment. So at the time of EPA's beginning, our country was experiencing some horrible environmental disasters. The photo that I'm showing you here right now, where all that smoke is coming up, that's actually on top of the water. That is the Cuyahoga River in Ohio in 1969. And our rivers were so polluted that they were catching on fire. This isn't the only time that that happened. And so our environment has improved considerably since that day, but we still have some issues in our country. And we're going to talk about some of those. So in the 1950s and 60s, we were zooming along with new technology. We were inventing pesticides, preservatives, plastics. A lot of these things were developed by researchers during World War II. And as often happens when technology is developed during wartime, it then becomes adapted for civilian use and becomes widespread in our society. And so we were inventing and developing and producing these things faster than we were studying what the potential harmful effects of them might be on humans, on plants and animals, and on our society in general, just the general environment. So a lot of the pesticides that were being put out were later found to be extremely harmful to people and also to animals. And one example of that is the pesticide called DDT. And DDT was responsible for the near extinction of our national bird, the bald eagle. And after some research and discovery, including the way it affected bird eggs, which you can see in this photo, the birds would ingest the DDT from just their normal eating habits. And when they would lay eggs for the next generation, the eggshells were so thin that they would break before the baby birds were able to survive on their own. So DDT was banned in our country, and thankfully the bald eagle has recovered and is no longer in danger. Unfortunately, I think some of the pesticides that are banned in the United States are still being used in other countries. And in some instances, I think our own country is actually still exporting them, which is another issue in itself. So one of the ways that pressure was put on the government to take a more active role in regulating some of these pesticides was through a book called Silent Spring, which a scientist named Rachel Carson wrote in 1962. And it really opened people's eyes to a lot of these issues. People really didn't know what was going on until she wrote that book. And it was extremely influential among regular people in terms of what was happening in our environment. So the Environmental Protection Agency is concerned about both water quality and water quantity. So water quality, how clean our waters are, and there are specific measures that states and cities are required to meet in terms of the quality of the water, and also water quantity, and that's managing our waters so that there's enough water for humans and also for wildlife. And we have many laws and regulations on both of these areas of protecting our water. And I should also mention that our federal government has the EPA, But each of our 50 states also has a state level environmental protection agency. In Kansas, where I live, it's called the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. So all the states have a role in protecting our environment as well. So some of our landmark environmental laws at the federal level in the United States include the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, which were passed in the early 1970s. And they're continually updated. And these laws are critical in improving the quality of our lakes and rivers and making our drinking water safer. We still have issues with drinking water in some of our communities in the United States, and I'm going to give you an example of that a little bit later. But some of the main causes of our water quality, at least in the past, and at times in the current day as well, are discharges from pipes coming out of industry, municipal facilities, including wastewater treatment plants, agriculture, at certain times of the year. In Kansas, it's in the spring. Farmers apply pesticides to their fields, and sometimes it rains and it runs off into the water. And then stormwater runoff, which is a huge issue in many cities where we have so much concrete and asphalt that the water, oil, grease, gas, pesticides runs off those surfaces and ends up in our water. But today, non-point source pollution is actually the greatest source of water pollution in the United States. And that's a little trickier to deal with because you can't go to one facility and say, we measure the water coming out of your pipes and you have too many chemicals in the water. Non-point source pollution is pollution that's not from one single place. It's pollution from the chemicals and fertilizers that we put on our lawns. It's sedimentation and soil runoff. For example, the picture on the right, both of these pictures are from my neighborhood in Kansas City, by the way. People were building a new house in my neighborhood, and they weren't following the proper laws about containing their soil on the property. And so you can see it's run all over the sidewalk. So, you know, it's a mess. And so they're violating the Clean Water Act. Unfortunately, on construction sites, that happens a lot. The other picture is oil runoff from cars. People might change their oil in their driveway. They spill some on the driveway, which happens, but they don't clean it up. And then when it rains, it runs to the storm drain. And then it gets in the water and pollutes the water. So we just say it, if it's on the ground, it's in the water. And that goes for trash too. Any trash that's on the ground, it all ends up in the water eventually. So even pet waste is a contaminant to our water. So it's important to pick up after your pets. And I'm gonna give an example of what happens when you don't do that here a little bit later in terms of one of our rivers. Lawn chemicals, if you feel you have to use them, you know, use as little as possible because that all goes into the storm drain and pollutes our water as well. And so, you know, we can do something about these issues in our own backyard by talking to our neighbors. We can control our own behavior in terms of contributing to water pollution in our own cities and communities. There are some other issues on a bigger scale too that are causing problems with our waters. Loss of habitat and just fragmented habitat. Here, this is an example of a forest. Some of it's been clear cut, there are no trees left, so there's no habitat left for animals, and the soil is not being held together. So when it rains and the water just runs off those hillsides, all that soil loosens up and it ends up in the water. So sedimentation of lakes and rivers, which is what we call it when we have a lot of soil running into the water, is a big issue. And climate change is going to magnify all of these issues related to water. We'll talk more about forests later, but you can see here how quickly that soil can loosen up and run off without good forest management. So we talked a little bit about chemicals in terms of water pollution, and we have thousands of chemicals all around us all the time. And it's astonishing to think how quickly that has happened in human history, where it's really only been the last 70 years where we've had a lot of chemicals in our everyday life, things in our own homes, in our own yards, that are common usage. And these things are released into the environment. We know from studies that our health is impacted by these toxins, and especially for children, because children are smaller than adults, but they're breathing in the same amount of air, basically, that we are. But per their body weight, it's a lot more. And so it's especially harmful for them. We also know that low-income residents, minorities, and Native populations are disproportionately impacted by these chemicals because lack of equity and concern about that has resulted in a lot of these facilities being located in their part of town. So this is something that is very important for us to consider from an environmental justice standpoint. And thankfully, through, again, citizen action and people raising their voices and getting out in the community and protesting and educating policymakers, we are starting to see more of those considerations being taken. We do have an important law that regulates chemicals in our country, the Toxic Substances Control Act. It regulates new and already existing chemicals, but unfortunately, it really should be a lot stronger, just in view of all the chemicals we have. They're supposed to be approved and reviewed by the government before they're used, but it's just kind of overwhelming. There aren't enough staff to review it all. So pesticides are a particular concern because a lot of times individuals are using them, they aren't reading the safety labels. So sometimes you can use too much and then you can harm your own health without really doing anything better for the environment. Integrated pest management is a method that we can use that is actually looking at the ecosystem as a whole. And instead of going around and trying to kill all the dandelions in your yard or kill all the mosquitoes in your yard, we can look at your whole ecosystem. Maybe there's some standing water in your yard that is causing the mosquitoes to live there. So if you empty that water, they'll probably go away. Just simple things like that are things that we can do to make our quality of life better, but also to protect the environment. So using pesticides particularly is harmful to honeybees and other really important pollinators that, for those of us who like to eat, like me, and we grow our own food in our gardens, as I do, My tomato plants need those honeybees to pollinate them, or I'm not going to have any tomatoes. My eggplants need the honeybees, so do my pepper plants. My flowers, if I want to have a beautiful yard to enjoy, they need those bees and other insects and even hummingbirds that do that incredibly important pollinator job for us. So we need to try to protect them and give them the best backyard habitat that we can. So the Pollution Prevention Act, it was created somewhat later than the other acts that I've been talking about, which were mostly created in the 1970s. Through the years, we've learned that we can react to things after pollution has already happened. We can try to regulate it, we can try to manage it, we can try to restore the environment, but maybe we should also give some thought to preventing pollution in the first place. And so the Pollution Prevention Act actually created a national policy to try to work with industry and encourage more sustainable practices, safer products, trying to find ways to reuse some of the byproducts of manufacturing. There's a saying that one person's trash is another person's treasure. So sometimes some of the byproducts that are used when you're manufacturing something, you may discharge it into the water or send it to the landfill, but there might be another company that could actually use that as a ingredient in something they're making. So the Pollution Prevention Act sets up some inventories where companies can try to look for other byproducts that maybe they could use as raw materials. And so the states and our universities are really involved in implementing this act, because those are the kinds of things you really need to do on a more local level. But the Pollution Prevention Act nationally creates that policy and provides a lot of assistance to implement it. So I was talking earlier about the importance of pollinators, and at least 30% of the food that we eat needs pollination. And bats, butterflies, bees, I mentioned hummingbirds, they are responsible for doing that work. And they're doing it for free. If we had to somehow figure out how to do that on our own, it would cost hundreds of billions of dollars to just attempt to do it. And I don't even know how we would manage it. So 90% of the Earth's wild plants are also pollinated by insects, birds, bats. So they're incredibly important creatures that we share our planet with. They do a lot of work for us. So the least we could do is try to make our backyards and our communities a little bit more friendly for them by reducing the amount of pesticides that we use. That's probably the number one thing that we can do to help increase the number of pollinators. Also, just planting native plants in our yards, even plants in pots if you live in an apartment building. Everything helps make little micro ecosystems for these animals to exist with us. And it also improves our own quality of life as well. So another case study I wanted to talk to you about involving both toxins and water is what happened in the city of Flint, Michigan in 2014. That city decided to change its source of drinking water to the Flint River to save money. And that river is heavily contaminated. And so not only did they change the water source to a contaminated one, They also didn't add a chemical to the water at the water treatment plant that helps prevent the corrosion of lead in water pipes. And you can see in the photo, the water pipe on the right had that chemical added to it. The one on the left did not. So all of that lead inside that pipe was flaking off and getting into the water, and people were drinking it. And, you know, nobody knew. And so there are a lot of children now in the city of Flint that have elevated levels of lead in their blood. And this can cause health issues, learning disabilities and deficiencies. And it's very hard to come back from that. Thankfully, a doctor in the city started noticing that a lot of her patients, a lot of the children, were having these elevated levels of lead in their blood, and she was wondering why this was happening. Because the United States, we haven't used lead in our gasoline for decades. Lead-based paint, we don't use that anymore, even though in older houses it's still there. But this was a very unusual situation. So she started investigating, and it's only because of her that the citizens became aware of what was going on with the water. And once they learned about this, then there were all kinds of issues raised with governmental agencies at the federal, state, and local levels not being responsible and following the laws, frankly, in terms of our safe drinking water. And so now the water source has been changed back to the safer one. Many pipes to homes have been replaced, and I believe eventually all of them will be. But most residents are still drinking bottled water, and you know they've really experienced a distrust in the government, which you can understand. It's you can't see what's in your water always. And so we trust that our government officials are following the laws and they're keeping up with these things. But as citizens, we need to pay attention as well and ask those questions. So this is a third case study that I wanted to raise. This is about the Blue River Watershed, which is in my city, in Kansas City, and runs through our metropolitan area. It covers about half of the area of Kansas City. And this study looked at what was in the river's water, what chemicals are in there. And it found some surprising things. Remember earlier when I was talking about picking up after your pets? Some of that ends up in the water. And you can see from the numbers there that there's a lot of fecal matter in the water. Some of that is because of our stormwater system and wastewater system in the city. It's very old. And if it rains a lot, it can overflow, and some of that can get into the rivers. But a lot of it is just from people not being responsible pet owners. Another thing that the study showed, and this was more surprising to me. I wasn't that surprised about the first part, but this was surprising to me. How many over-the-counter drugs we find in our water system. So everything from ibuprofen or aspirin to antibiotics they found in the water. And the amounts are small. It's not a lot, but it is detectable. And these substances aren't regulated in the water system. Our water treatment plants do not clean these up. So many times in cities, the city is located along the river. The drinking water for the city comes from that river. It goes through the water treatment plant, which, you know, is treating the water to take out a lot of the pollution that might be in there, but it's not taking these things out. And so we're actually drinking that. And then it goes into the wastewater treatment plant. And again, not treated for these kinds of things. And so the next city down the river, you know, so this is something that scientists are starting to watch. And it's a reason why they tell you, please don't, if you have leftover medication, please don't flush it down the toilet because it does get into the water. Wildlife drink the water. If you're fish, you're swimming in that water. If you're an angler and you go fishing and you catch that fish, you may end up eating some of these substances because they have accumulated in the tissues of the fish. So it's just something that's very interesting. We're just starting to understand the implications, but please don't put your unused medication, even if it's aspirin, down in the toilet, and you will be helping our water a lot. So I'd like to shift to managing our forests now. This has been a big issue in the United States recently because we've had a lot of wildfires, and I know that Ukraine has as well, and that forest management is a big issue there in Ukraine. We have an agency that is responsible for managing our forests. It's called the Bureau of Land Management. They also manage other public lands as well. We do have other agencies that are involved in managing our public lands as well. This is one of the biggest. So I'm going to talk about it today because we don't have a whole lot of time left. So this is a bit of a controversial agency because it does tend to manage our forests for things like mineral rights, mining, oil and gas, and has not always treated Native Americans very well in terms of environmental justice issues. Citizens, again, have raised their voices about this agency, and I think that it will start to change its policies and its management outlook a bit as we go forward. And it was actually established as this agency in 1946, but it's one of our oldest governmental agencies in the country and has managed about 10% of our acreage in the United States. So it has a lot of responsibility. In Kansas, and I believe in every state, we also have our own governmental agency that manages forest areas. We do have forests in Kansas. We are mostly an agricultural state and have some forests here and there, and they're very much valued because about 95% of those forested areas are in private hands. So government, including the Kansas Forest Service, works with those landowners to protect those trees, to plant more trees, to encourage biodiversity. So we're not just planting the same kind of tree everywhere. And the Forest Service does that work through a number of different programs that are affiliated with Kansas State University. Everything from protecting streams from soil erosion to encouraging production of forest products and also wildfire management. We do have large wildfires in our state as well. So this is just to kind of show some of the forested area in our various places. Ukraine has about 17% of its land area is forest. The United States has about 32%. And a lot of that is in the northwest part of the country. But we have a lot of forested area in the southeast of the United States as well. And in Kansas, only about 10%. So not as much as the other areas of our state. So some of our deforestation issues, I mentioned the wildfires. Drier climate is impacting our trees, allowing insect invasions, which are killing off entire forested areas at a very swift rate in the last few years. As the climate gets drier and hotter, invasive plants come in that weren't there before and may take over the native plants, which changes the biodiversity of the forest. We're still converting a lot of areas with trees to agriculture for our urban areas that are sprawling out, which can be dangerous actually during wildfire times because you have homes in places where there was only forest. And so that causes a lot of serious problems with endangering human life as well as property. And just still mining and oil exploitation. The bottom picture there you can see is where that area has been mined. A lot of roads are being put through there. And we haven't always prioritized the financial resources we put into managing our forests. So some of those issues are being rethought now. And again, the environmental movement, citizen engagement has been a big driver behind the rethinking of forest management in the United States. The pictures, the video of the wildfires that we've had has been seen by everyone and is just devastating for people as well as our environment. And a lot more people are speaking out about it. So we're looking at changing that management regimen to meet multiple needs, not just the needs of wood products, which we need those too. But we're also looking at managing for biodiversity and wildlife habitat. Trees are critical for water and air purification. To help offset climate change, we need those trees to be in the ground, and for flood and soil erosion control, and also as a renewable energy resource. And another part of rethinking our wildlife, our forest management is how we manage the undergrowth in the forest. We need to return to our management policies of setting smaller fires to clear some of that out. As population growth increased into the forest, people didn't want those smaller fires set because they were worried they would get out of control and burn their houses down. But there are ways to do it that are responsible and safe. So we're starting to return to that and put some more resources into that. So I'd like to close by talking about community forestry, because that's a critical part of managing our forests and our environment. And it's actually probably the part that impacts most of us to a greater extent than some of the larger forested areas, the management there. So community forest includes basically the entire built environment that we live in. It's not just our trees, it's the other vegetation that we have. All of those gardens I was talking about earlier are part of the community forest. Our lawns, our school grounds, our parks, any vacant lots, things that might be growing there. It includes things like shrubs and flowers and ground cover, and also plants and animals animals that live in the city. They're part of our ecosystem and part of the community forest. We're part of the community forest because we are part of the ecosystem of the city. All of the things in the built environment, the streets, the sidewalks, buildings, all have an impact on the microclimate in our cities, and help explain why in the central part of the city, where there may be fewer of these green spaces, in the summertime, it's actually a lot hotter in those areas of a city than maybe a little bit farther out from the center, where there may be more parks and people have more space, so they have more green area. They can plant flowers, they can plant gardens. So the community forestry program is a systematic approach to managing the ecosystem in our community. And the way it works in my state of Kansas, under the Kansas Forest Service program, each community has its own program, and the state helps with technical assistance and advice. And there are some grant programs and things that give a little bit of money to help. All of our cities have laws that restrict you from, you can't go to a park and cut down a bunch of trees. So you're not allowed to do that. And a lot of cities have strategic plans for increasing the number of trees and also making sure that every neighborhood can benefit from that program. Trees impart a higher quality of life for all of us. I mean, we enjoy looking at them. They provide shade and a cool space for us to spend time outdoors. They increase our property values. They help our mental health. They give kids a nicer place to play. So we need every neighborhood to benefit from that. And a lot of cities have involved their citizens in those plans. So just to conclude, without having laws and regulations about environmental pollution and reducing it and eliminating it, we would still have rivers being set on fire. We would have more communities drinking water that wasn't safe. We would still have lead in our gasoline and in our paint. We would still have a lot of problems with chemicals that we no longer have because they're not allowed any longer. And we would have even more inequity than we do now in terms of where some of these industries are located. So our job's not over though. We still have issues with the environment. We still have a lot of problems that need to be resolved for not just human health, but also the plants and animals that we share our planet with. And that means it's up to us. As citizens, we have to engage, we have to research, we have to find information that is truthful information. We need to talk to our elected officials and insist that the laws and regulations be enforced. We can use our court system to do that. We can raise our voice in civic engagement activities with other people. We can vote. The environment, make that one of your issues that you ask your political candidates about. You know, what's your opinion about forest management? This is a concern to me. Or other environmental issues. Supporting investigative journalism. Support those newspapers or blogs or however you get your information that are looking into these issues. And support the leaders that do protect the environment, that do care about these issues. And not just for us, but also for the other species that inhabit our planet. So you all have the power, all of us do. We just have to use it and engage our circle of influence to do that. And we all have one. We may not think we do, but we all do. We all have friends, family members, that we can talk to, people we work with about these issues. And with that, thank you so much for inviting me to visit with you today. It's been my honor to join you and talk about these issues, and I welcome any comments or questions.
Shari, thank you so much. It was so interesting to hear your presentation. I had so many thoughts and ideas about parallels that I've seen in Ukraine, how much we've seen the community step up in recent years. In Kiev specifically, there are so many community gardens and really good grassroots organizations rooting for protection, for more greenery, for in general making our communities better, greener, healthier places. But it's so, I think, beneficial for all of us to learn the challenges that nations all across the world, come up to, the US included, on all of your examples about Flint, about how the rivers literally used to catch fire. I mean, that's incredible. And you wouldn't necessarily think that that was a thing in the US without diving deep there. We actually have a question from Masha, and seeing as we have talked about so many kind of maybe not uplifting examples, but her question is, as a leading environmental and climate activist and researcher, what makes you hopeful?
What makes me hopeful is opportunities like this to talk about these issues with other people who care about them, and then knowing that those people are going to go out and they're going to engage, and all of a sudden we have a bigger group of people working on these issues. And so even though some of the examples that I gave you may not have seemed very uplifting, they really in some sense are, because we're aware of them and citizens have taken action to help resolve them. For example, in the Flint example with the doctor who, discovered there was a problem and took action. She investigated to find out what was going on. And, otherwise we don't know, maybe this would still be going on today. And so, these are really, they're kind of inspirational to me. I mean, it's sad that they've happened, of course, but, it just shows how each of us has a role to play. And that makes me very hopeful. So yes, there's no reason really for doom and gloom. I mean, we can solve all of these issues. We can take action, and there's no action too small to make a difference.
Thank you, Shari. I love that way of looking at all of this, that it's not something to be sad about, but to feel uplifted and empowered to seek allies and work on solving these problems. You mentioned,
Yes.
how important it is to talk with other people. And I'm sure that as an educator, you've met with lots of different mindsets, and it's kind of your job to find a way how to talk and educate people. So my question is, do you have any advice on how one can talk about these issues to people that might be skeptic about the climate crisis that is happening, and that has been supported, this theory, by scientists all over the world, and in general kind of perhaps be resistant to the idea that the environment and ecology is something that all of us have to kind of play our part in? Any advice on how to kind of reach those people instead of preaching to them, basically?
Well, I think that's probably the most important thing right there, is not preaching to them. We all tend to resist that kind of engagement from other people because we feel like our views are being challenged and not really listened to. So I think it's really important to listen to people and try to understand where they're coming from, and then talk to them in terms of their own place. And one of the things that I really like to do is get people involved in an activity. So if you have a group of people and maybe they're a little bit skeptical that pollution is a big problem or that climate change is a big problem, and maybe they like to spend time outdoors, maybe get them involved in cleaning up the environment. Maybe there's a river there that they like to fish in. Maybe do a day where you're picking up trash along the river, and you're taking an action that benefits them because they have a cleaner environment to go fishing in. And they can start to see really in the environment what's happening. And so involving people, engaging them rather than lecturing them, I think is a much more effective way to try to get them to understand the issues, or at least understand a little bit more about where you're coming from. And if you continue that, a lot of times you can find a common ground. You may not agree on everything, but I think pretty much everyone could agree that we don't want trash in our rivers. We don't want trashy parks. Those are not good things. And so we can agree on that, and we can come together and take an action to make that better. And, that's not going to solve the climate change problem, obviously, but it is a start. And on all of these things, you have to start somewhere. That's why there's no action that's too small, because small actions can lead to bigger ones.
Thank you, Shari. On the topic of small actions, I would actually be curious to hear your thoughts about this change in narrative, this kind of shift that's been happening lately, about how kind of in the previous years, there's been a lot of talk on individual responsibility, turn off the tap while you're brushing your teeth, try to dispose of your trash in a proper way, recycle when you can. And there has been a lot of pressure on the individual to do these kind of ecologically conscious things in their everyday lives. There's also the issue of the grand scale, as you said, pesticides, the government okaying or not okaying kind of use of them, and this impacts us on a global scale. And so what are your thoughts around this, how there's been kind of a little bit of backlash to the individual and saying that what we do on a smaller scale does not impact us the way it does when corporations or governments kind of slip on their responsibilities in that sense?
Well, it's very true. I mean, there are the two levels of action. There are the actions that we can take ourselves and try to encourage our friends and families and our workplaces to do the same. And there is a role for government. Government has to step up and play its role in protecting the environment for people and plants and animals. We can't just assume that industry and even government facilities like water treatment plants, we can't assume that all the people working there are just going to do the right thing, that they even know what that is, and so there is a role for government to make sure those people are educated about, what they're supposed to do, what are the laws, what are the regulations, and then enforce it. And in our country in the last few years, the budgets for enforcement of environmental laws and regulations has really been reduced drastically. And we've seen that in the lower number of enforcement actions, the legal actions that have been taken against polluters. So, I'm hoping that we're not going to keep going down that road, because, you're right, citizens can't go into a factory and, tell the people there what they're supposed to be doing. But you know, government can monitor that and make sure that they're filing the reports they're supposed to file and doing what they're supposed to do. So I can understand how citizens may eventually feel like, you know, you're just putting this all on me, where, you know, I can't, I can do my part, but I can't do, you know, all of it on the biggest scale.
Yeah, I think what you said really underlines the necessity of having all stakeholders being really invested, but also having the resources to be able to do these actions. You know, governments need appropriate funding that, you know, for staff and for initiatives that would be able to support this, but also people need also, you know, recycling programs that are provided by the government or licenses that are given to recycling plants so that they are able to choose these options. So really, I can see how it's an important spectrum to cover all of these things, and they complement each other.
They really do. And, you know, I think the key to a lot of this is just, it's asking the question as a community, how do we want to live? You know, what is important to us in our community, and getting all those people around the table, including business and industry. I mean, you know, we all like our cars and our TVs and our mobile phones and all these products that we buy, and they have to be made somewhere. You know, they don't just appear. They, you know, there's a manufacturing process, and we, you know, this is an important part of our economy. You know, it provides people jobs. You know, so we, you know, industry is not bad. You know, we need it for a lot of reasons. And so we just need to work together and have everybody around the table, you know, and ask ourselves as a community, how do we want to manage our resources? And, you know, come up with a plan that works for everybody. And probably not everybody's going to be 100% happy, but, you know, we can try to get to that place. And a lot of communities do this, and they have strategic plans and development plans that have involved all of these different parts of the community. And it's important to have just regular citizens there too. You know, that's a really key element of any community plan. So.
Mhm. Absolutely. There are so many things, and it's a complex issue around the needs of societies, but also communities. Workers need jobs, and it's everything has to be balanced, but at least when everyone is interested in kind of the same overall goals, at least there's hope that we can find a way to navigate these alleys together. We have a comment from Sveta that's hello, and it's so nice to hear you. I adore observing nature and enjoy making pictures of wildflowers. I feel like you would get along, Shari.
I think so.
So
So
that, yeah.
thanks for attending and for leaving your comment. Yes, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, it's so nice to see that this is actually something universal, that people all around the world love being outside. I mean, those who don't have severe allergies, for those people, I'm so sorry. Yeah, but that we all enjoy our communities. And Shari, we'll be wrapping up now, but I just like to thank you so much for inspiring us. And honestly, I do feel a lot more hopeful as someone who does suffer from a bit of climate anxiety, I would say, and about the future. But it does give me some confidence that things are moving in the right direction, I think.
Well, that's great. And I do want to end on a hopeful note. There are things we can do. There are a lot of people who care about these issues, and I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you for inviting me, America House in Kyiv. And I look forward to visiting you all there in person, hopefully soon. And yeah, just enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Shari, and thank you for joining us and for sharing your knowledge. It was such an interesting overview, and I definitely want to dive in deeper into a lot of these subjects. And just for everyone watching, give you a little bit of a teaser of what we have planned next for our Greenhouse at America Summer. We will be having meetings with eco-activists that work every single day to change their local communities. We will have a meeting with Ukrainians who do a number of different initiatives, not only around the ecology in the sense of plants, but also with animals and our native fauna and flora. Expect a lot more exciting content from us on our social media pages. And we wish you the greenest, happiest, most fun summer of your life so far. And we look forward to seeing you back here again at the America House virtual floor very soon. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye.